With the Burning Crusade Classic Anniversary servers right around the corner, today we're diving into something a bit different than the usual pre-patch guides or how to prepare your characters. Instead of talking about what to farm or which professions to focus on, today we're talking about the lesser known changes coming to each of the classes moving into the Burning Crusade. Now, when most players think about TBC class changes, the big ones that come to mind immediately are paladins becoming viable tanks, shamans getting bloodlust, druids with their epic flight form, and so on. But there are many other improvements to your class that you may have not known about. These aren't the kinds of changes that will be the most obvious necessarily, but they are things that will help you across the board from leveling all the way to endgame. So let's cover 5 of the smaller or lesser known changes for each class in TBC, and today we'll be beginning with paladins. For paladins, consecration becomes a baseline ability in TBC. In vanilla, consecration was down the holy tree, and you had to invest 11 points into it before you could unlock this key tanking ability. But when the pre-patch hits, you'll just be able to learn this from your class trainer and always have access to it. Next is Avenging Wrath, the new DPS cooldown for paladins in TBC, though it does have some restrictions attached to it. It increases your damage by 30% for 20 seconds, which sounds amazing on paper. However, it causes forbearance, meaning you can't use your bubble for a 1-minute duration. This means sometimes you go all in at the start of a fight on your rat paladin with wings and your trinket and so on, and then you get a bit too lucky with wind fury procs and you end up pulling aggro and you can't bubble, so just be careful with that. Both factions of course get both seals in TBC. In the original game, Horde got Seal of Blood and Alliance got Seal of Vengeance, and they really were not made equal at all. Seal of Blood was dramatically better for dealing damage, and while Seal of Vengeance had more applications with tanking, Seal of Judgment was often just good enough. For TBC Classic in 2021, Blizzard made the call to give both factions access to both seals at maximum level. You'll still get your faction specific seal as you level up from 60 to 70, but at 70 you'll get the opposite faction's one too. Fourth is that paladin tanking becomes legitimately viable from super low levels. You don't have to wait until you're near level cap before you start doing this. By level 20 you have your taunt, righteous defense, you have spiritual attunement that gives you mana back when you're healed, and you have consecration too. These 3 abilities are pretty much all you need to start tanking and spamming dungeons. In vanilla, protection paladins were decent in dungeons, but people often had to be patient with you because you'd be waiting to drink in between pulls, and whilst you did have AoE threat, it was still kind of not that good. But in TBC, protection paladin, even from a super low level, is going to be great. Holy paladin's illumination talent also gets nerfed. In vanilla, when any healing spell would critically strike, illumination returned 100% of the mana cost, which is absolutely crazy. In TBC, this has been lowered down to 60%, so it's not quite as effective, but Holy Paladin still remains super mana efficient. Moving on to Warrior. First up, dual wield arms becomes viable early on in TBC. Whilst Fury will still be the king for pure DPS, arms can run a dual wield setup in the early phases and put up respectable numbers. Also, you put up the Blood Frenzy debuff that makes the target take increased physical damage, which will be a big selling point that makes you worth bringing to the raid early on. Eventually you will want to respec over to Fury, but at the start of the expansion don't forget about dual wield arms. Second, Shield Slam has a 100% chance to dispel a magical effect, up from 50% in vanilla. Now, you probably didn't really use Shield Slam much in vanilla anyway because most people just tank as Fury Prot or arms during leveling, but in TBC you will be playing Prot if you are tanking, so just realize that this is a thing you have in your toolkit. Third is that spell reflection shouldn't be expected to work on every single spell in the game. Quite often it will reflect abilities back to bosses or enemies, but sometimes the debuff it would have reflected is just way too powerful, so it just stops the effect from hitting the warrior but doesn't actually reflect it. Fourth is that you may remember warriors were completely memed on during the start of TBC Classic. Everyone thought they were going to be pretty terrible and barely worth bringing along to a raid, but in reality they were one of the stronger classes throughout the entire expansion. The catch here, however, is it's a lot more difficult to do well in TBC compared to vanilla. In vanilla you got your Prebis and you're kind of already beating every other class in the game. In TBC you're going to need a lot of properly bis gear and a good group to support you too, but just know if you want to carry on playing DPS warrior, if you can find yourself a good spot in a good raid, you will still do super well. Finally is that weapon skill ratios get converted to expertise, and this goes for every melee class that cares about default expertise, but especially the warrior, because if you rolled a human or orc warrior for weapon skill bonuses in vanilla, these racial bonuses will now be expertise, and fortunately for you, they're still the best races to play this class as. The bonuses to expertise are nowhere near as broken as the weapon skill racials were, but it's a little extra something that you wouldn't otherwise be getting. Let's move on to the hunter. First up, the infamous one button macro just doesn't work in TBC. If you're not familiar with this, it was a legendary macro that people used way back in the day that could essentially automate your rotation by making it so your auto attacks and steady shot would never clip one another. The modern API just doesn't allow this kind of interaction though, so if you're going to be playing your hunter, you're actually going to have to be playing the class properly, and from what was expected to be a class that would work with one button, hunter turned out to actually have a really high skill cap. Second is that all hunter pets now have the same attack speed in TBC. In vanilla, your pet's attack speed was all over the place. There were some pets such as the bats from ZG or Broken Tooth that had 1.0 attack speed. This made them super strong in PvP, whereas slower pets would generally not be as useful. TBC normalizes this and every pet has a 2.0 attack speed, so what really matters now is your pet's ability and not the attack speed, and this is why at endgame most people pick the Ravager because it has gore and bite, which allows your pet to spend its focus super fast. Your pet also gets massive survivability buffs. This goes for Warlock as well, but I thought I'd mention it here. They gain avoidance, which is a huge reduction to area of effect type effects, and they gain more spell resistances too. This means your pet just doesn't randomly die to raid damage, as it would constantly do in vanilla. I'm sure if you played a hunter, you know how annoying that was. In TBC, you can now use your traps in combat. You don't have to feign death and frantically spam your trap button anymore. They do have a 2-second arming time instead of just coming online more or less instantly after you drop them, but this is a great quality of life change, especially if you're freezing and frost traps. Finally, for hunters is that Arcane Shot no longer inexplicably shares a cooldown with Aim Shot anymore. I really don't know why it ever did in vanilla, but it did, so there we go. On top of that, Arcane Shot also dispels one magical effect. So sometimes you do have to be a bit careful if you want to press this button, because maybe a mage wants to spell steal something and you just Arcane Shotted the buff off the enemy, which can very much be annoying as well. That being said, sometimes the dispel is useful. Of course, in Wrath of the Lich King and beyond, this dispel gets put on Tranquilizing Shot instead, but just realize this is a thing in TBC. Shamans are one of the most anticipated classes for TBC because of how much stronger they become, and they get some pretty significant changes. First of all is Totemic Recall that lets you remove your totems quickly for some of their mana costs back. We've all had that moment in a dungeon or a raid where a shaman forgets a totem and then some trash comes running in from the back. This shouldn't happen anymore in TBC. Next is Heroism or Bloodlust will be raid-wide on TBC Anniversary servers and will reset on encounter end. Originally and in TBC Classic, this effect only applied to your party, not the entire raid. For Anniversary though, Blizzard are changing this so that people don't feel pressured to group swap shamans around to maintain a Bloodlust buff, and probably to promote a bit more class variety in raids too. Third is a totem which people often forget about, the brand new Wrath of Air totem, which gives your party a whole bunch of spell power. This new totem will be what shamans are dropping in their caster group instead of Wind Fury for their air totem. Fourth is that there's some extra things you need to be doing as an enhancement shaman if you want to be min-maxing. First is Totem Twisting. This is dropping your Wind Fury totem so it applies the buff to your group, and then swapping to Grace of Air so they can benefit from its agility buff, and before the buff from Wind Fury fades, you redrop that totem and then go back to Grace of Air. Essentially, you're maintaining Wind Fury whilst keeping Grace of Air active for as much of the boss encounter as possible. This is a DPS gain, and depending on how min-maxy your raid is, you may be expected to do this, so just know about it. Finally, Draenei get to be shamans now, obviously, but what you may have not realized is that their racial heroic presence gives their entire party a bonus 1% hit chance. This is really nice to have early on in the expansion, so if you're playing in a raid where you can expect to have a shaman on the alliance, you can itemize for 1% less hit. For example, in your caster group, if you have a Draenei shaman, they're going to be providing 4% hit and 3% spell crit on top of the other totem buffs, which is a great example of why everyone still wants a shaman in their group, even if Bloodlust is now raid-wide. Rogues have some interesting changes too. First of all is I believe rogues are one of the biggest winners from dual specialization existing on Anniversary realms. In vanilla and original TBC, TBC Classic, this didn't exist. Now with dual spec, you can maintain your raid spec and your arena focused PvP specs simultaneously without having to constantly swap. I know the price isn't exactly huge, but it's just sort of annoying to do. Maybe you want to send some arena games here or there, or just do some battlegrounds, and having to constantly go back and swap, it just gets old really fast. So this is a massive quality of life improvement for the rogue. Second is that there's a new poison called anesthetic poison, and it's just straight up a worse version of instant poison that does no threat. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think there's ever been a use for this, and it didn't exist in Wrath of the Lich King either, so I think Blizzard came to the same conclusion. Third is that poisons don't have charges anymore in TBC. You still do have to craft your poisons, and it's its own mini rogue specific profession, but at least they don't run out of charges halfway through a boss encounter. Cloak of Shadows only has a 90% chance to resist spells in TBC, not the 100% or immunity that it provides in future expansions. So there will be times where you're running up to mage, they press polymorph, you press cloak, and you still get polymorphed, and you're gonna hate it. But no, it's not a bug, this is just how cloak works in TBC. Finally, as poisons still don't scale with anything apart from the talents in the assassination tree. No scaling with attack power or spell power. This means they're still very underwhelming in the expansion, unfortunately, and it wouldn't be until Wrath, when they gave them attack power scaling, where they started to become really good. Druid get loads of cool stuff in TBC. First is the Epic Flight Form quest awards a pretty good idol as a reward, which benefits all your forms. You also get a key to summon the extra boss Anzu in Sethic Halls, who of course drops the Ravenlord mount. And during TBC, and Wrath of the Lich King for that matter, you must have had a druid who's done the Epic Flight Form quest in order to summon this boss. In Cataclysm and beyond, you can just summon him as any class for free, but if you want a chance at that mount in TBC, you need to have a druid in your party that's done the quest. Second is that, in case you're wondering, no, druids still don't have a normal resurrection in TBC. You have rebirth and you'll be thankful for it. Third is that druids can learn flying from their trainer at level 68, which makes them the only class in the game able to fly pre-70. It also saves them some gold too, which is a nice thing as well. Fourth is of course you can pick herbs whilst you're in flight form. You can't mine, however, so a lot of druids are always herbalists, so they can take advantage of this. Being able to fly down and pick a node without worrying about clearing enemies out has always been so useful. Finally, power shifting with Wolf's Head Helm is still a thing in TBC up until Black Temple, where the upgrade to this item is the Curse Vision of Sargeras. Power shifting is simply going in and out of cat form when your energy is about to tick, and then benefiting from items and talents that also give you energy. And if you are min-maxing, you will want to be doing this. Mages have some pretty big changes too. First of all is they get teleports to Theramore for the Alliance and Stoneard for the Horde. You'll be able to train these when the pre-patch is out, but you'll have to go to each of these locations and find the portal trainer there in order to get them. Second is that Ice Block becomes a baseline spell for all mages now. However, it comes alongside the Hypothermia debuff. In vanilla, Ice Block was a frost talent, and you could use it back to back with the Cold Snap talent. But in TBC now everyone has it, albeit you can't use it twice in a row anymore. Third is that Mana Shield now absorbs all damage and not just physical damage. This can in certain circumstances make it a more useful tool, but it still drains your mana incredibly fast, so I'd always be careful about using this. Mages also get some of their tactics nerfed in TBC. It used to be the case for Icy Veins and Mind Quickening gems stacked with one another, and they could get their global cooldown down to about 0.75 seconds. Blizzard actually went and nerfed this during TBC Classic and capped the maximum reduction on the GCD to 1 second. Despite this, Mind Quickening gem is still a very powerful trinket and one that's worth having, but just don't try and stack these two things anymore, it's not worth it. Finally, it appears as though Blizzard are trying to nerf AoE farming for mages in the expansion. As per the PTR, when mobs have been in combat for an extended period of time, they will become immune to slowing and root effects. It seems as though this time around Blizzard want you to level the organic way, though at the same time I'm sure people will still be finding ways around this. Warlocks get some good changes too. First of all, you can't summon at the start of TBC in Netherstorm. This restriction was in place initially during TBC and TBC Classic, and I imagine it was there so people actually did have to go and buy their flying mount instead of just getting summoned up to the dungeons. Your new Felguard summon at the end of the Demonology tree will benefit from the Black Buck trinket that's dropped in Blackwing Lair. The on-use effect will actually make it quite a bit more powerful and a decent option for the open world as well as dungeon farming, so if you own this trinket, definitely take it with you through the Dark Portal if you're playing Demonology for a bit. Whilst Warlocks are well known for their incredible single target and AoE damage in TBC, you unfortunately do not get Seed of Corruption until level 70. So if you are going to be dungeon farming, it's probably going to be a lot of AoE pulling where you dot stuff up, throw a dynamite and then press Hellfire. This is another reason why Demonology can be good, as your Felguard just provides a nice consistent damage. Next is that Conjure Firestone and Spellstone are changed from being offhand items to relics that go in your wand slot. In vanilla, you probably never really use these items, but in TBC, since they're wands, they actually do have some niche uses, because many wands in vanilla straight up don't give any spell power whatsoever, and if you're playing a bit of a fresher Warlock character, you may not even have a decent wand at all. The Firestone gives you bonus fire spell damage, which is decent for AoE farming before you hit 70, and Spellstone gives you some critical strike rating and can dispel all harmful magical effects, which is again pretty useful situationally. Finally is that you get a threat reduction effect in Soul Shatter. However, remember it costs a soul shard and that it is cast against all enemies. What I mean by this is if you have 10 enemies in combat and you Soul Shatter, some of the enemies can have the spell resist against them while other ones cannot. This is different from other threat reduction effects which either just work or they don't, so just be aware of that. Sometimes you'll shatter and enemies will still just run at you. Finally, we're on to the Priest. First is that all priests have Fear Ward now, though it's been nerfed from a 30-second cooldown to a 3-minute cooldown because Fear Ward just always was that crazy good. Next is Star Shards. One of the Night Elf Priest racials is no longer channeled and now is a damage over time effect instead. The problem is that it does arcane damage, so it's not benefiting from your bonus shadow damage effects, and it's not improving your vampiric touch, so it's really not that great, but hey, it's something I suppose. Draenei Priest gets Symbol of Hope as one of their racial spells. This is an instant cast ability that at level 70 will restore about 1000 mana to all your party members over its duration, making Draenei Shadow Priest the ultimate mana battery. Blood Elf Priests get a brand new ability called Consume Magic, which lets you consume a beneficial magical priest effect on yourself to restore mana, which can actually be useful if you're playing Holy Priest where you do run through your mana spamming Circle of Healing. Finally, the Lightwell talent is still a thing in TBC, however, players still have to click it, and if you take direct damage, the healing effect will still be cancelled. I've really no idea why Blizzard kept this talent in such a genuinely terrible condition. It feels as though it's worse first aid, but you have to put so much more effort into getting it, and it's a near end of talent tree ability for a pure healer spec. One more thing for Priest is that the bonus threat from Mind Blast has now gone, so those are 5 of the lesser known changes for every single class in TBC. Some of these are good quality of life improvements, or things you just may not have necessarily realized that you're going to be getting. Let me know if there's anything else you think was worth a mention in the comments down below, and as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.